Hello, this is Brian with AI Explore. I want to show you how to create an engraving pattern inside of Photoshop. And so one of the projects we're doing with Module 1, we're trying to create an image that looks like it was created in 1830s. And because 1830s is 9 years before the daguerreotype had even been invented, photography is not an option. So we're trying to create something that looks like a drawing or an etching. So I want to walk you through the process of how we're going to do that inside of Adobe Photoshop. And first, you're going to have access to these 4 halftones. We're going to use these inside of our creation. So you're going to grab these files and we need to open them one at a time inside of Photoshop in order to turn them into a pattern. So we'll just start with our very first one. I'm going to right click on this, open with Adobe Photoshop 2024. And there's our pattern. Now you'll see mine's already added to a folder called Engraving, but I want to walk you through the process of how to do this. So with this file open, and it's here inside of Photoshop, what I want to do is go to Edit, Define Pattern. The file name is fine. I'm just going to remove the .png, so that'll be my new pattern name. Okay, so once you get this much, click OK. It's going to add it to your patterns. If you go underneath Window, Patterns, you're going to see here's my patterns that I've already added. This is all 4 of these that you see right here. So I'm going to actually do Cancel, and I'll close that out. So take just a second, go through and add 4 of these patterns into your Photoshop. And I went ahead and selected all 4 of mine, created a folder, called it Engraving, and dropped them into that folder. That way I've got all of these things in one folder for use. Okay, next, I want to take my file, my rendering inside of Midjourney and be able to bring it over into the application. So in Discord, I've already been playing around with a lot of variations on this smartwatch for the 1830s. And this one I kind of enjoyed the look of it. I like this little pull-out slab, and I thought this is actually kind of cool. I'll play with this as an idea. So I've upscaled it 2x, and there is my file. Now I could go ahead and upscale it even further, but this will work. This gives me a reference image that I can work from. So what you're going to do is find the image that you like. You'll notice mine is 16 by 9. That's what my aspect ratio is. And I've already upscaled the file. So what I want to do is I'm going to grab this file and bring it into Adobe Photoshop. So take just a second and do that. Okay, I've got my image and I'm going to bring it over into Adobe Photoshop. It tells me on the clipboard it's 2912 by 1632. I'll go ahead and give it a name of clock. And it doesn't really matter my color in the background. I've got that, and I've pasted in my watch. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to make this a square image. All right, you guys are probably pretty familiar with the basics idea inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to do Image, Canvas Size, and my width is my largest number, 2912. So I'm just going to copy that, paste that to my height, and make sure anchor it is to the center and say OK. There we go. Okay, so we've basically got our structure here, but what I want to do is, while not necessary, this is good to have for later. So I'm actually going to use my marquee tool, and I'm going to select ever so slightly overlapping where this ends, and I'm going to do it on both sides, so Shift key to make sure I'm getting both things. And generative fill, generate. This is just going to make sure that there's a consistency with the overall image, and we're kind of getting the refined look of this file for our purposes. And there we go. All right, and I'm going to take just a second more from my personal file, and I've got this, looks like a token piece for a game. It's just an extra, so I'm going to select that, generative fill, remove, generate. All right, and I'm going to flatten the image. Layer, flatten image. Okay, so what I've got now is a square image. That's a nice smooth presentation. I can save this. I'm going to change the image size, and this is for the purpose of, because I'm working with these patterns here, I want to give it the best possibility to look the best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to 1440. That keeps it square. Resolution of 300. So I'm going to have to come back and 1440 by 1440, resolution of 300 dpi, and say OK. Okay, so my file is 1440 by 1440 at 300 dpi. There's my image. It's pretty much wrapped up. I'm going to do File, Save As, and Clock. I'll just put it on my computer. And let's see, I'll stick it in my watch folder. Save. There we go. All right, now the rest of this is where we begin actually turning this into a halftone engraving image. Okay, for the next part of this, you've already got your product sitting in the center of a 1440 by 1440 300 dpi image. It's layered, flattened, everything's great. So here's the next step, and I'm going to go ahead and record this as an action. So hopefully I can just share this action with you and you can apply this on other products in the future. But here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to take this image, which you see right here, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. There we go. That was easy enough. Now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a solid layer. So I click on this little icon, I click on solid color. It pops up this, whatever the last color I was using. And so I'm going to actually change this to a soft gray. So 40 to 85. There's our soft gray. And I want to drag this to the bottom. Okay. Next I want to add a folder. And this folder, click, it's called Group 1. And it doesn't really matter what the name of the folder is for now, and change this folder from pass-through to multiply. And I'm going to drag our watch into the folder. Okay, so we see group, here's our watch, and it's inside of the folder, and there we go. Okay, that was pretty simple so far. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to brighten the shadows of this particular grouping. Now we are going to be able to, because this is a smart object, we can make these changes and just tweak them as we move through. So the next thing I want to do is we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, and we're going to go down to Shadows and Highlights. All right. Now I've already got this showing up. You might not see this if this button here, Show More Options, isn't clicked. It might look like that. This probably is your default. So I'm going to click on Show More Options. And we've got two things here I want to change on this particular setting. First is the amount. Right now it's set at 35%. I'm going to change it to 20. And down here where it says black clip 0.01, I'm going to change that number to 2.55. And say OK. So you'll see that the smart filter has some effects being applied to it. I've got a smart filter and shadows and highlights adjustment layers being applied to the image. And this is basically what we have to do. So we've created a way to brighten or adjust the shadows and highlights, and we're going to use this and constantly tweak this as we move forward. Okay, so part one's done. Now on to part two. Okay, for our next step, we're going to create a halftone mask. In order to do that, I first need to actually create a subject mask for my product here. So the way I want to do that, you've got a lot of different options actually. With this new generative toolbar that's down at the bottom, I've got Select Subject, which works really well. We also have this button over here, which allows us to object selection tool and then basically select the tool. We can also go up here to the top and choose select subject. All three of those will basically give you the same option. And I'm going to leave this on here. I want to make sure to include everything. I do not want it cutting anything out yet. I want to basically select my product here. So everything's been selected in this, and I'm going to choose the mask tool. There we go. We've knocked out the background. I've got my watch on the page just like I want it. Okay, so we've got this. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to rename this layer. So it's layer 0. We're actually going to be creating multiples of this, and I'm going to name them based off of the halftone patterns that we've already got created. This way I know exactly which halftone pattern is being worked with. So I'm going to double click layer 0, and I'm going to change it to 6px underscore 0. Okay, that's going to be the same as this first pattern. That's the one we're going to be working with in our halftones, is this 6px MSK. Okay, so I'm going to be working with that in just a second. Next is I want to set the threshold. Now I'm making sure I'm selecting the object itself, and you can do this by going to Image, Adjustment, Threshold. Okay, when I do this, what you're going to see is a threshold level. The default is 128. We're going to change this one to 51. Now you're going to say, okay, Brian, it looks like we're just losing everything. Don't worry, we're getting somewhere with this. I'm going to say okay. And what I've got right now is a threshold. You can see that number, that information is underneath the bar here, has been applied. We've got 6px with a smart filters, threshold, and shadows and highlights. Now I'm going to minimize this for just a second by clicking this little collapser. And I want to take this layer and duplicate it 3 more times. So the way I do that is I'm going to grab the layer, drag it down here to this little plus inside of a box button, and there's my first copy, my second copy, and my third copy. So now there are 3 copies. Now I'm going to go ahead and rename these based off of the names that I see over here. So 6px0, I'm going to come under here and change this one to 4px underscore 90. This one I'm going to change it to 2px, and px deals with pixels, and it's how thick the pixel line is that is white. 2px underscore 0, and then the last one is going to be 1px 45. Now you can actually see what these numbers represent. Okay, so 0 means it's horizontal this way. Okay, so 6 pixels, a white line, 6 pixels, and it's running 0. It's not rotated at all. The 4 pixels is 90. It's basically turned straight up and down. So a 4 pixel line that's at a 90-degree angle. The 2 pixel line is also running horizontal, or 0 on rotation. And then the 1 pixel line is 45, and that means it's running at a 45-degree angle. So 0, 90, 0, and 45. And there's 4 different weights: 1 pixel, 2 pixel, 4 pixel, and 6 pixel. Okay, I'm going to turn off the visibility of these other images, and I'm going back to the original 6 pixel 0. Okay, so I'm making sure I'm selecting this. What I want to do next is I'm going to edit the layer mask. That's this creature over here on the far right side. So I'm going to select that. Now, what I'm going to do is go to Edit, Fill, and you'll notice the options. Contents, color, mode is normal. We're going to take a change here on this, and we're going to select, in place of color, I'm going to choose pattern. This works because I've already got a pattern applied. I'm going to choose pattern, and then I get to go and choose the pattern from my pattern option. So under engraving, I'm going to choose the first one, which is our 6px at 0 rotation. And for mode, I'm going to choose multiply. And okay. Now, if you're able to zoom in on this, see what's happening? The pattern, the halftone pattern, is being applied to this layer. So this is really kind of cool. We're able to create our first 6 pixel using that white indication here, the white line that's 6 pixels running at a 0 rotation. All right, that's our next step. We're going to walk through on the following steps where we're going to apply this to the others. All right, so our first halftone mask has been created. Okay, we're going to continue with the halftone mask, and we've already done the 6 pixel. We're now going to go to the 4 pixel. And for this, all we're going to basically do is turn on that layer so that we're seeing it. And then we need to click on the little drop down, and we're going to modify our threshold. So similar to what we did before. So for this next one, the 4px90, our threshold level is going to be 102, and we'll say OK. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to modify our mask in the same way we did before. So we select our mask, we choose Edit and Fill. Pattern is already selected because remember this is a duplicate of the prior. And in place of this one, we're going to go up to the next one, which is our 4 pixel. And say OK. There we go. Now, because these are layering, we're starting to see different arrangements of our colors. Now, the threshold means a different range of black and white, so the gradient at a certain point, we're making that level a solid black with this pattern, so it's going to create different depths. We're going to go ahead and continue with this, moving to our next one, which is the 2 pixel. And we've turned that level on. We're going to do the drop down. We're going to choose threshold again. And for this one, we've got 153. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and change our pattern. Oops. I'm going to choose our mask, our edit, fill, and we're going to choose the 3rd engraving pattern. Right, and then our last, do our drop down here, change our threshold, and the threshold for this one is going to be 180, and we're going to change our mask fill, and the pattern is the last one, which is our 1 pixel at a 45-degree angle. Okay, so there we go. We've created a multi-layered engraved rendering of our product. Okay, I like the way this is finished up so far, but one thing I noticed about using the halftones is when you've got defined lines in your drawing, as far as hard edges, you do not get them by utilizing just these halftone patterns. So I want to show you something that I found that works pretty well as a way to kind of modify this and give us a better line, and it's a simple process. So I've already created a folder, and I'm calling it Group 2, and inside of this folder I'm going to show you what I have added. Okay, so inside of this folder I've got the picture. Basically I went into one of these grouped items, grabbed this, so you see this is layer 0, I pasted it in, and then I brought over the mask. Okay, so this mask, if I were to look at just the mask, you'll see it still has some of the little lines. I cleaned it up a little bit. I'm not worried about it being perfect. This just gives me a good reference point to kind of work from. For those who don't know, I'm on a Mac. I did press the Option key and then click the mask, and it allows me to see just the mask mode. Okay, with this image brought up like this, I'm actually going to select the image itself and go to Filters and Filter Gallery. See, I've just chosen that recently. So Filter Gallery is going to pull up this. Now, what I've done is I've used Stylize Glowing Edge. Okay, so with Stylize Glowing Edge, it creates this nice sharp outline of the edge, and I've changed the edge width to 1. You can increase this if you want, but what you end up with is a little bit more than what was necessary. So I'm taking it down to 1. So I'm getting a clean line. Edge brightness, I bump it all the way up, and smoothness I take to 15 and say OK. Now, this doesn't look like very much yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this. So image, adjustment, and invert. All right. Now, again, this is not that exciting. You really can't see very much happening with this. But the way I want to kind of take this to the next level is literally levels. So with the levels, what I've done in here is I've taken the mid-range and I pushed it all the way down into black. So I can crank it up, you can see, but I'm taking it all the way down. So what it's doing is it's basically moving a lot of that mid-range out and kind of giving us a more posterized look to this line here, right? And then the next thing I've done is I've turned it to black and white. Now, by taking this and getting rid of a lot of the mid-range and turning it to black and white, also inverting that line, what we have now are more precise, clean lines for the object. But I'm not stopping there. The next thing is I'm going to take this whole group. You can shut it down if you want to, squeeze it down, but choose this entire group, and instead of normal, change it to multiply. Now what that does is it takes and creates a line around the object. Another thing you can also do with this is the fill area inside of here. So there's a lot of detail that's happening. But let me show you something. If I'll leave it back in normal for a second. There's a lot of mid-range stuff that's happening here that we might not want. And so we can adjust that. Maybe even do another levels. There we go. So I'm doubling up the levels, getting rid of most all of that gray. And now I can change this to multiply. There. This gives us what looks almost like a nice chiseled line edge around the object. And there we go. So we've got our two groups, we've got our base level color fill, and this file's done. So this is how we can create the etching style for our render coming from Midjourney. In that case, you could apply this same thing to any photograph or any image. That's pretty much it. A special thanks goes to P.S. Gips on YouTube, who shared the halftone patterns, the 4 that we used in this presentation. So again, P.S. Gips. All right, thanks so much for watching the presentation. Hopefully this is helpful to your efforts to turn a rendering from your Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, etc. into an engraving for use of our first project.